I might add, was a wonderful time, but it's good to bring the dialogues back home again. And I want to formally welcome you to the 2017 11th International Humanitarian Dialogues. It's hard to believe that we're starting our second decade. And of course, the theme this year is changing times, new opportunities for international justice and accountability. As I mentioned last night at the Jackson Center, the dialogues are made possible because of the support of so many of you, our sponsors, but very much in particular, our host for the dialogues, and that is the Chautauqua Institution and, of course, the Athenaeum Hotel. And we certainly could not be doing what we're doing in a wonderful setting that we have at Chautauqua. And the weather's going to hold, trust me, we're going to have sun, but at this wonderful institution that I know all of you enjoy so much coming to for the dialogues, to enjoy the camaraderie, to enjoy catching up, to enjoy the porch sessions in the evening. But here to welcome us is the new president of the Chautauqua Institution, and I would like to invite to the podium Michael Hull.
Well, good morning. We're really thrilled to have you here. One of the earliest visits that I made when I was appointed president was to go to the Jackson Center and be in conversation with our region about the importance not only of what the institution does, but in partnership with the Jackson Center. And this is just an extension of the way that the region is thinking about bringing important dialogue to Western New York that has impact well beyond Western New York. We just concluded our 144th assembly last night, so if we look blurry-eyed, forgive us. It was a summer where we were pushing on the notion of civil dialogue. For those that don't know a ton about Chautauqua, its purest manifestation is that for 9 weeks we explore the great issues of the day, trying to get at the best of human values through the arts, recreation, lifelong learning, and religion. And given what's happening in the country and the world as we debate and try to figure out a way to even talk to one another, what Chautauqua spent its summer on was finding ways to knit communities back together so that we could actually solve problems. So the fact that you're here looking at international humanitarian issues and that you're trying to figure out dialogue on that level is perfectly aligned with what we believe. And so we're grateful to you on that front. The other thing that Chautauqua has been focusing on is ways that this region can be a stronger partner in the international conversation, which makes it all the more special that you're here. I truly hope you enjoy the grounds. For those for whom this is your first time, I hope it won't be your last time visiting us at Chautauqua, and that the team here, while a little bit bleary-eyed, shows you the hospitality for which we're extremely proud. Welcome to Chautauqua Institution. We hope you have great conversations. We look forward to hearing more about the outcomes. Thanks.
First, let me, before I introduce some very, very special guests and we move forward with our program, I have learned that the dialogues are available for viewing on YouTube right now as we're speaking, but most importantly, it will remain archived on YouTube. So, of course, it's hard for you to get word back to your schools that it's going on, but it's going to be there. And so if you want to go on to YouTube and type in IHLD 2017, the dialogues will come up on YouTube, and again, they will remain there. And so when you get back, you can get word out to everybody that all they have to do is type that into the YouTube and find the dialogues, and they will be archived there. Certainly the sessions here in Fletcher Hall. The remaining sessions we will be videotaping, and we'll get those out to your schools to post as you wish. But anyway, this is my chance to introduce some very, very special guests that we have with us today, and of course what make the dialogues possible. And of course, first I would like to introduce the prosecutors. And so if I look down, and I think I'm going to start off with my favorite court, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, and work from there in no particular order. So from the Special Court for Sierra Leone, we have here with us David Crane, the founding prosecutor from Sierra Leone. We have, is Stephen here with us yet this morning? Stephen Rapp is on the grounds, let me say that. Stephen is here with us. And of course we have Mohammed Bangura, who is here representing Brenda Hollis for the Residual Special Court for Sierra Leone. For the ECCC, we have the current prosecutor, Nick's ready to get on his feet. We have Nick Kumjian, and Robert is on the grounds, and Andrew is also on the grounds. And so you will get to see both of them throughout the dialogues as we move forward. I think they may have been up a little late last night, but they certainly will be with us. For I believe the very, very first time joining us at the dialogues, we have always had a representative of Norm Farrell at the dialogues, but this time we have the prosecutor from the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. And so I'd like to introduce Norman Farrell. Welcome. We're pleased to have you with us today. Okay. From the International Criminal Court, representing FATU, we have Fabrizio Gradiglia. Close, but welcome. I believe this is also your first trip to the dialogues, and so we're very, very pleased to have you. Did Kevin get up this morning? There he is, right there, and we have Kevin Hughes. Kevin Hughes is wearing two hats today. Kevin is representing, of course, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and he is also representing the mechanism for the International Criminal Tribunals. And for those of you that are not familiar with that, that is the residual mechanism for the Yugoslavian Tribunal and the Rwandan Tribunal. And so we're very, very pleased to have him. Kevin, I think this is also your first trip to the dialogues. Oh, Stephen Rapp, we mentioned him earlier. Stephen is here with us. And so, again, I welcome the prosecutors with us. I would also like to recognize another prosecutor, and a first for this prosecutor as well. But we also have General Mark Martins from the U.S. Military Commissions. General Martins is joining us for the dialogues, and we're very, very pleased. And of course, he will be joining us on a panel discussion this afternoon and a porch session tomorrow morning. And so we're very, very pleased. I would like to introduce Mr. Elhadj Sai. You will get to know him very, very well in just a few minutes. He is the Secretary General for the International Federation of the Red Cross. I would like to introduce, we have a couple judges. You know, judges and prosecutors can mix in a very social setting or a very open setting like this. And so again, we have a couple judges, and I would very much like to welcome them to the dialogues. We have from the ICC, Judge Christine Vanden Weingart. Thank you very much for joining us. And from Uganda, we have Judge Duncan Gaswega. This is not Duncan's first trip to the dialogues. Duncan was with us 5 years ago, and we welcome you back. Thank you for joining us. A couple other quick introductions. There are a lot of people that make this very, very special, and you will get to know them over the next few days. But we are fortunate to have two former presidents of the American Bar Association. Mike Greco is here somewhere. I think I saw him come. There he is, right there. And we have Jim Silkenet right here. And so thank you very much for joining us. Okay, we have a very, very busy program, and so we're going to move into it very quickly. It is tradition. We have a lot of traditions at the dialogues, and that's one of the things that makes them special. But we always have an essay contest award winner, and we do that award right off the bat. And to tell you about this contest, to tell you about the sponsors of this contest, I would like to bring forward a very, very good friend. Drew has been the education director for the Jackson Center. He is a teacher extraordinaire of 8th grade. Is that right, Drew? Of 8th graders up near Buffalo. And he runs a summer institute, which is just a fabulous endeavor. and he introduces young people, and that's what it's all about, and many of them are in the back today, and he introduces them to international issues that, quite frankly, American kids don't see. And so I would like to invite Drew to the podium, please.
Good morning, everyone. And Jim, thank you for that gracious introduction and to everything you've done to put us in this spot today. And I'm here with my colleague, Lori Raybould, who helped start the Summer Institute 10 years ago. You know, when Jackson came back from Nuremberg, the first stop that he made was at the University at Buffalo. And there he quoted H.G. Wells, who said that civilization is a war between education and ignorance. And in an age of extremism here at home and abroad, we're so proud to sponsor with Impunity Watch and to take the idea of David Crane to have an essay contest that allows our students who for 5 days study international issues and, more importantly, get the inspiration from people like yourselves to stand on your shoulders to repair the world. So this year, our essay contest had our students explore the lives of Eleanor Roosevelt, Raphael Lemkin, and Robert H. Jackson, which was the contest title and charge. If Anna could come up from Impunity Watch here, she will tell you a little bit more about it. Our students are in the back there. We had a record 75 come to pay tuition, to spend 5 days to learn more about how to change the world. Summer Institutes, David, have also started in Albany, in the lower Hudson Valley, and in Rochester. This year alone, we trained close to 200 students. We're hoping to expand to Rwanda next summer, all because of the inspiration of standing on your shoulders. So with that said, Anna, if you could tell us a little bit more, and then we'll have the winner come on up.
Hi, I just wanted to start by saying thank you to Professor Crane, who is the founder and faculty advisor of Impunity Watch, for inviting Sarah and I to be here today. This is our first time at the Dialogue, so we're very excited. For those of you who aren't familiar with Impunity Watch, we're a law journal. We publish articles regarding human rights issues, usually with an international scope. We also have a news division, which is led by Sarah Laffin. And we also have the Syrian Accountability Project, which tracks and monitors the Syrian crisis. This year, I was able to participate with the essay contest. I chose this year's winner because not only did she look at the lives and the accomplishments of the individuals who were the topic of the essay contest, but she went further and she looked at their mentors and their inspiration to find her own. This essay was very well written, and I really enjoyed her perspective. So congratulations to Andrina Kirst.
Okay. It's the time of the dialogues for our keynote speaker. And this, of course, is our annual Clara Barton lecture. And it is sponsored by, of course, the American Red Cross. It is absolutely our pleasure to have the American Red Cross as a sponsor for the dialogues. They have been with us now for, gosh, I believe going on 5 or 6 years that they have been part of the dialogues and, of course, sponsoring this lecture. And so I would like to now invite a representative from the American Red Cross forward. and to tell us a little bit about the American Red Cross, and of course to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Thank you.
Kobe Langley. I'm the Senior Vice President for International Humanitarian Law and Service to the Armed Forces at the American Red Cross. It's my pleasure to be here with you today to introduce the dialogues, as well as just to tell you a little bit about Clara Barton and what she means and how she's relevant today. And then, of course, introduce our keynote speaker, Elhadj. Welcome. I think it's fortuitous that this dialogue is occurring very shortly after the 68th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions. Through the conventions, which were technically published 68 years ago, about a month ago, we've chosen to celebrate and honor the spirit of Clara Barton here in the United States. I'd like to express my sincere appreciation for the opportunity to share that with you today, but I wanted to talk with you about one particular article, more specifically one common article that I think epitomizes the spirit of the dialogues, the Clara Barton dialogues. There's one common article in particular that best captures the spirit of the Geneva Conventions, first appearing in the preamble to the 1899 Hague Conventions, and then reiterated again in the Geneva Conventions, the additional protocols, and numerous other pieces of international jurisprudence. It is known as the Martens Clause. The Martens Clause states, in cases not covered by this protocol or by other international agreements, civilians and combatants remain under the protection and authority of the principles of international law derived from established custom, from the principles of humanity, and from the dictates of public conscience. So for all of the lawyers in the room, that is quite a bit of, as they say, dicta to try and work through. Public conscience. Public conscience. How do you codify public conscience, and what does that mean for us today? I would suggest for you and for the individuals that have not read the ICRC report on people on war, what it suggests is that public conscience, and more specifically the morality that's reflected in the Geneva Conventions, is under attack. What it suggests is that the body of law by which we are all here to defend and to educate the American public, and indeed the world on, is facing its own crisis of conscience. Do we reflect the public conscience that accepts the diminishment of human life as it relates to torture? Do we accept the public conscience as it reflects the diminishment of the protection of the rights of aid workers? Do we protect the public conscience that allows the killing of innocent civilians who are trying to provide medical aid and attendance to victims of war? I would suggest to you that if you read closely the People on War report, the public conscience has changed. The public conscience has changed. And so does this body of work. Does this body of work also change? Or do we fight to regain the moral high ground? We are truly at an inflection point, and I am proud to be here today with this esteemed group of academics, practitioners, young academics, and advocates to challenge you, and to challenge you through this lecture series, to reflect on that point and to ask ourselves where we stand and where we will stand in the coming decades. Luckily, I believe we are not alone in this fight. I believe that it is a fight worth defending. And I also believe that our global reach and influence through the International Federation is standing by our sides and will help us accomplish what I do believe will be an immense challenge in defending the morality reflected and the public conscience reflected in the Geneva Conventions. Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross in the Civil War battlefields in order to help protect that public conscience at the time. These lectures reflect her ideals, and they challenge us every day to live up to her own reputation. It's an honor to introduce one of those defenders of that torch, and indeed the leader of the entire Red Cross and Red Crescent Federation movement. Elhadj is the Secretary General of the IFRC. He began his leadership role on 1 August 2014 and is based in the Secretariat in Geneva, Switzerland. Mr. C has extensive experience in leadership roles in the humanitarian sector, having previously served at a senior level with UNICEF, UNAIDS, the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, and other agencies for more than 25 years. Before joining the IFRC, the world's largest humanitarian network, Mr. C was UNICEF's Director of Partnerships and Resource Development in New York. He's also served as the UNICEF Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa and Global Emergency Coordination for the Horn of Africa. From 2005 to 2008, Mr. C was Director for the HIV/AIDS practice with the United Nations Development Program in New York. And before that, he worked for the Global Fund to Fight AIDS. Director of Operational Partnerships and Country Support in Geneva as well. Mr. C has also held the position of UNAIDS representative in New York and Director of the New York Liaison Office. From 1988 to 1997, he's served as a Director of Health and Development Programs with Environmental Development Action in the Third World in Dakar, Senegal. Mr. C holds a bachelor's degree in Arts and Human Sciences from the University of Dakar. He then pursued his master's studies in Arts and Germanistic at the University of Graz, and he graduated in the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna. He was also awarded a postgraduate diploma in education from the École Normale Supérieure in Dakar. He speaks English, French, and German, and is a national of Senegal. It's my pleasure to introduce the Secretary General of the IFRC, Mr. Elhadj.
Thank you very much, Kobe, for these kind words, and I'm very pleased and humbled, to be here, this morning. Thank you, Dean Michael Schaff, for the invitation on behalf of all of you, and also to my colleague Chris Rassi, who convinced me it is so important, to be here this morning, so that I have to squeeze this in my schedule between two trips to the Middle East, where, as you well know, we are facing a grave humanitarian crisis. So when I looked at the very long list of prestigious case Western alumni, I can't help spotting the name of Mr. Scott Peck, who gave us one of the world's best-known self-help books, In the Road Less Traveled. Peck's routes to fulfillment remain a lifetime's work for most of us. His title also speaks specifically to me as one of those who is anything but less traveled, because I spend more than half of my time traveling. But not only traveling, going to work to see ordinary people doing extraordinary things in even more extraordinary situations. And it also speaks to an expression which we use in the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, where people talk about the last mile, trying to describe how we need to make an extra effort to reach those who are hardest to reach and that are most vulnerable, and where we try to turn that last mile into a first mile, namely to be there where the needs are greatest, to be there because that's where we are needed most. And that is a uniqueness of our movement, the International Federation, which is composed of 190 national societies of Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in the world, and also present in those communities with 17 million volunteers. Those are the ordinary people doing very extraordinary things. So we are everywhere, of course, you work, 190 countries. And we work alongside those communities we serve. Another specificity is that we are there all the time, and I stress all the time, before the shocks and hazards, during the shocks and hazards, and after them. We are there in a continuum to accompany people to wake up every day, to develop strategies of survival, but also to strive to care for themselves and care for their families, and most of the time to try to recover what is dearest to them and that they may have lost along the way, which is simply put, their human dignity. And as the principles of humanity, we have also the fundamental principle of humanitarianism, and what former the International Committee of Red Cross President Max Huber described as the unconditional recognition of the value of everything that has a human face, which overarches everything you will discuss over the next few days, in which clearly links as international humanitarian lawyers and criminal lawyers to us and the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent as plain international humanitarians. And nobody, you mentioned that, personified humanity and the humanitarian principles like Clara Barton, who is rightly held in the highest esteem, not just in this country, but over the whole world. The fact that she was born on Christmas Day in 1821 may have hinted that she was destined to be a gift to the whole world. So much of what she believed and did rings true to the work of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement well over a century. As a fearless campaigner against slavery, she was a forerunner of all of our work with the most marginalized, the most vulnerable, and the most abused. As one of the mothers of volunteerism, famously mobilizing hundreds of people to tend to wounded soldiers at the battlefield of Sharpsburg in September 1862, she was a forerunner of an international organization now numbering, as I said, 17 million volunteers. It looks like it all starts from a battlefield. Sharpsburg in September 1862, Solferino, 1865. Battlefield used them to have names. They used also to be geographically confined. And then they reminded us that even in the worst situations, there was always a place and space for humanity. After Solferino, later on, then we had La Marne, we had Verdun, we had Waterloo, names and names of battlefields that were clearly defined and geographically confined. Today, those battlefields don't have names. They are not clearly defined because they're everywhere. They're everywhere, like they are in Raqqa in Aleppo, which I visited not long ago. They're there in Yemen, where while we speak, 600,000 people are suffering from a disease that it caused by war, cholera. But they're also on the streets of capitals, in Europe, in Nice, in Paris, in London. They're also in our places of worships and in schools, which is totally unacceptable. Back to Clara Barton. As someone who brought her supply wagons to the aid of the distressed on both the Union and the Confederacy side, she was a pioneer of the humanitarian principles of neutrality and impartiality. As someone who set out to find missing people, alive or dead, and make contacts with their families, most notably at Annapolis, she could easily be transplanted to some of the work that the Red Cross is doing right now in many places in the world, be it in conflict situations to restore family links, be it alongside the migration routes, where many people are losing their lives and then children getting lost, or being right now in Sierra Leone as people are searching frantically for their loved ones lost after the mudslides a fortnight ago. Clara memorably said that everybody's business is nobody's business, and nobody's business is my business. I like that. Again, she speaks to us and to the international movement of Red Cross and Red Crescent, which is concerned with precisely everybody, with everything that has a human face. And that includes all of those whom society rejects as nobody. Those left behind because of their race, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their legal status, their geographical remoteness, or just their sheer poverty. Clara, of course, founded the American Red Cross in 1880. And it's a pleasure to see you here, Kobe, today. I know you are with us physically, but you may be somewhere else in spirit, maybe in Texas. Today, where thousands of your colleagues and volunteers are there doing what Red Cross volunteers do, responding to shocks and hazards like they're responding to Harvey today. So let me take then this opportunity to pay my respects to the American Red Cross volunteers alongside the whole century, including those ones today actively responding in Texas. The American Red Cross is one of the largest national societies in terms of staff and volunteers of our movement, and they're a key player in our global international federation as one of the original founders and a current member of our governing board. Many of you will have seen the way they mobilized this great country's response to tragedies near and far, from the Indian Ocean tsunami at the very end of 2004 to the Haiti earthquake of January 2010 to Hurricane Sandy in 2012, and while we speak, right here in Texas. A month ago, we were together again in Haiti, seeing the laying of the first stone of an American Red Cross-funded blood transfusion center in Port-au-Prince. And there have been 5 American presidents of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent, including the iconic Henry Davison as the first from 1919. Ladies and gentlemen, it serves my purpose to acknowledge some of the moving spirits behind this lecture and these dialogues, because the theme that unites them all is the relief of human suffering. That is why we are all here. Today, I would like to look at both international humanitarian law and international humanitarianism, because they are part of the same continuum, and 2 things link them: the legal and regulatory environment in which we as humanitarians operate, and the fundamental humanitarian principles which underpin all our work. Here, perhaps, I should also acknowledge the spiritual, emotional, and intellectual forefather of both international humanitarianism in the form of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, and also of one of your professional disciplines, that of international humanitarian law. I'm, of course, referring to the Swiss banker, Henri Dunant, who, in the terrible wake of the slaughter of the Battle of Solferino in 1859, laid the foundations of 2 things. First, the movement of which I'm proudly a part of today, and second, of the Geneva Conventions, which are, of course, central to your work and central to our work, and which have become ever stronger since the Protocol of 1977. And all we share in the same context, because we share the same world, this one world of ours, which unfortunately today is hurting. It is hurting because it is a world in which the UN estimates that 100 million people need humanitarian assistance in any 1 year. 100 million. At a cost of $22 billion US. It is a world of multiple possibilities for unhappy alliteration, in which today I will simply mention 3 diabolic Ds: disease, disaster, displacement. Let me address the first D, this disaster. As I said this week, our focus has been on the victim of the mudslides in Sierra Leone, with over 400 people dead, and we're still counting. The focus is also on the worst floods in South Asia in living memory. More than 800 people have been killed and 24 million people are affected following widespread floods in India, in Nepal, and in Bangladesh. Bangladesh, the country of floodlands, which was devastated by floods with massive loss of life a generation ago, and which has since done so much to mitigate their damage, has experienced again the most severe flooding in 100 years. Any week, the disaster agenda is different, but it is always there. We approach the morning news headlines with trepidation. We know that disasters impact most on the most vulnerable, the poor, and most marginalized, the women, the children, the elderly, the disabled. We also know the reasons for so many disasters. Natural shocks will always happen. Natural hazards will always happen. There will be a monsoon season every year. There will be cyclic droughts now and then. But there is no fatality that a hazard has to become a disaster. Our level of preparedness, or lack thereof, will be pretty much impacting on the fact that these hazards become disasters or not. In Sierra Leone, deforestation, unplanned urbanization, can also, be part of a contributing factor to that. In Southeast Asia, early warning, early action, early response, building back better, and also building the resilience of people or lack thereof will be making a difference if a shock or hazard will become a disaster or not. And that's why it has been now proven by the bank, the World Bank, that $1 spent on disaster preparedness saves us $7 in disaster relief. And those dollars also save countless lives, not least the lives of life givers themselves, with half of all preventable maternal deaths worldwide occurring in conflicts and disaster settings. Disaster preparedness is life readiness. It is central to what we do also in the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. Meanwhile, the second D is disease. Disease which is so often compound of famine, the scourge of by which 20 million lives are still in grave danger. In South Sudan, in Somalia, in Nigeria, in Yemen. FuseNet measures the level of famine and then the vulnerabilities of people in 5 grades. 5.1, relatively okay. 5.2, in stress. 5.3, in crisis. 5.4, in emergency. And grade 1 again, let me do it. Grade 1, it is okay. Grade 2, it is stress. Grade 3, that is crisis. Grade 4, emergency. And grade 5, famine. In most of the places we work and where the needs are greatest, at best, people are in stress. At worst, they are in famine. That is the reality that is today happening in those places that I mentioned. And adding insult to the injury in the form of horrific cholera outbreaks in Somalia and Yemen. Can we imagine today that 540,000 out of 27 million Yemeni, meaning 1 in 50 people, have already contracted cholera? 22,000 died, and there are more than 25,000 new cases still occurring every week. And there is more. This week we hear of chronic measles in Somaliland. In recent months we have been on trail of yellow fever in Brazil and dengue fever in Sri Lanka. In 2014 we were at the forefront of Ebola response in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, where for the first time, maybe one of the most critical responses that we had to conduct in a public health setting was to organize burials in a safe and dignified manner to prevent, the chain of transmission. And we thought that I've saved 10,000 lives, in that process. It is indeed quite unusual to measure the success of the program through the number of people you bury. But unfortunately, this happened to be this time the right thing to do. Much of our work on disease revolves around ensuring the capacity to detect, to prevent, and to respond at the community level. Because epidemics begin in communities and they end in communities. And in that last mile we work, and then we turn to our first mile. There is often no doctor. There is often no school. And this is the community and the first responders, that will be making a difference. The third and final D is for displacement. With today seeing the highest number of displaced people globally since the period of trauma at the end of the Second World War. We often hear that reference. We've never seen anything like that since the Second World War. We don't have a Third World War, but the only reference we're going back is to a Second World War, and it is quite scary. The UN puts the figure of the displaced at 66 million, 44 million people displaced within their own countries, and 22 million people, 22 million refugees and asylum seekers outside of their own countries. To alight on just one situation in which we are all painfully aware, in Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, our national societies alongside, with the IFRC and the International Committee are strengthening a movement response to the Syria crisis, which is now entering, unfortunately, its 6th year. Over 5 million Syrians have been displaced outside their own countries, and even more within it. Of those outside, 3 million in Turkey, while Syrian refugees make up a full third of the whole population of Lebanon. What generosity from a country with so many of its own challenges before it takes on those on anyone else. Our IFRC member in Syria is the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, or SARC, as it is known. It has led the humanitarian response inside Syria from the beginning. I visited Syria 3 times over the last 3 years, and saw how collectively we reach more than 5 million people each month through the combined efforts of more than 7,000 active volunteers and 2,000 staff. People who are themselves are affected, getting out of their way to help their fellow citizens. And unfortunately, quite often at a very high price. We already lost 65 volunteers in Syria, already 12 in Yemen. And there is nothing courageous, to count, the courage of the number of people we lose on the line of duty by providing humanitarian assistance. It is simply unacceptable. When people are outside their own countries, whether they are migrants or refugees, Our national societies are present alongside the whole continuum, from the countries of origin, for instance, in West Africa, where they reach out to communities and give impartial and factual information of what it is to move country or for whatever reasons. And this is very critical because there are many criminals who are making a living out of it, selling illusions to people, smuggling people, abusing them along the way. In their often perilous journeys, for instance, across the Sahara or across the Mediterranean Sea, to get to Europe, in their points of arrival, supporting their immediate needs when they get to countries such as Greece, Italy, Turkey, Lebanon, Uganda. Uganda, which is now one of the countries with the largest number of refugees, with almost 1 million South Sudanese people finding refuge. And it is very important to mention here, when about 1 million refugees hit Europe, we all talk about the refugee crisis when it hit Europe. But when there were 3 million in Turkey, over 1 million in Lebanon, almost 1 million in Jordan, and now 1 million in Uganda, we don't talk about a refugee crisis. And it is very important that we remind ourselves where the problems are and where they need to be responded to. We believe in the FRC, in protection and assistance, and that should be provided regardless of legal status. Like one of our volunteers in Italy put it, there is no illegal human being. Ladies and gentlemen, I often offer this quick and grim sketch of global humanitarianism simply to say that this is the humanitarian world, and this is, of course, our collective world, the world we share, the humanity we share. It's a world in which we often try also to reach out to young people to educate them, particularly in conflict situations, but also in all situations. In conflict situations so that they put into practice the values of humanitarianism, learning to recover self-esteem and dignity, learning to respect the other, learning tolerance, learning reconciliation, and then learning to regain hope for a better future. Let me now turn to your specific field, that of international criminal law and international humanitarian law. From the 17th century roots in the thinking of Hugo Grotius, there have been evolutions in laws about war and conflict. In the 21st century, the prime purpose of IHL is to protect not only civilians and civilian objects such as hospitals and water and sanitation infrastructure, but also combatants, including the wounded, the prisoners, who are caught up in these terrible scourges of armed conflict and war. Within the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, as you know, situations of war and conflict are largely the preserve or sister organization, the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross. As ever, I pay tribute to the ICRC, which carries out magnificent work in situations of extreme danger and is officially the guardian of international humanitarian law. Today, I would like to acknowledge the important work undertaken by investigators, prosecutors, lawyers, and others in the pursuit of justice in the wake of war crimes. I'm so pleased to do that today. I think in my entire life, I've never been surrounded by so many prosecutors and judges, and lawyers, and feel safe, at the same time. I'm pleased to see representatives of the international criminal tribunals, including the International Criminal Court. It has been 15 years now since the Rome Statute entering into force, and there have been more than 40 individual indictments in the ICC. It has been a time in which there have been achievements and results, and also a time in which there has been more complications to match. The accusations of imperialism and an over-focus on Africa, the tensions between the pursuit of justice and the pursuit of peace, the challenges of avoiding politicization and bias, the complexities of complementarity whereby the national state is supposed to be the first to deal with a violation, with the ICC a support for that process and a court of last resort. I'm not the person to unpack those issues, but I can talk to how the work of international investigators and prosecutors can affect the work of humanitarians. IHL violations clearly lead to massive humanitarian needs, and they need to be stopped. They must be stopped. At the same time, we must always be careful that any work undertaken to prevent and respond to IHL violations, including by international criminal processes, does not create further needs, nor create challenges for humanitarian actors to do their work. The obvious challenge comes down to neutrality. While humanitarians would like to see an end to violations of IHL, at the same time, as you know, we cannot engage with or support these legal processes. Even speaking to court staff may mean that the humanitarians come to be seen as not being neutral, undermining their ability the next day to get to the same community and provide assistance, to people in need. What I can say today is that some of our ways of working may be useful for you in your work, given that we are often operating in similar complex environments. In particular, humanitarians take a do-no-harm approach, which seeks to evaluate every one of its actions to ensure that it only does good and not harm. For humanitarians, the do-no-harm approach can be applied at the most granular levels, and it makes very real sense. Do not build a well in places where the water it produces will be fought over. We say simply and practically enough. Do not build toilets without locks in places that are darkened at night and where the safety of girls are not guaranteed. This is common sense. Consideration of do no harm is a prerequisite of every humanitarian action. How can court staff apply the same principle? You can answer that question better than any of us. To look at just one example, could it be useful for prosecutors and investigators to ask themselves whether their choice of witnesses or the process to identify them might have an intended negative impact on a community? If, say, they view teachers as key interviewees, which makes perfect sense in that teachers are literate and they often speak an international language, then they must, at the same time, ask themselves the question: if a teacher is taken out of a community to be interviewed, often removed to safe housing in that process, then who will remain behind to teach the children? And not only to teach them numeracy and literacy, but back to the education plus of tolerance, reconciliation, peace, and living together. You will see that I'm trying to offer what may look like a practical wisdom here, but it comes alongside the philosophical observation, which I think is of real interest to all of us in applying bodies of formal law to informal settings. That the IFRC humanitarian work is in the furthest reaches of the communities we serve. I mentioned on the outset of the lecture that last mile we have to walk. And there's not only no school, there's not only no doctor, there's often no government, and there's often no formal law. We're often operating in those places which uphold ancient and customary law, shaped by tradition and values. And we draw a parallel here between the fundamental principle of humanitarianism, which I have emphasized in this lecture, and some of the fundamental principles of the communities in which we work. These are the principles behind the law, be it international humanitarian law or customary law. And there are messages for us all here about how to plug into the values and norms of communities which may seem oceans away from the tenets of formal law. But at the end of it, it's about providing justice to people, providing protection to people, and there's so many parallels can be drawn. Let me now further explore some of the legal and regulatory aspects of humanitarianism going beyond IHL. You are lawyers, and I feel it will be of interest to you to know how laws, at least guidelines, can enhance our humanitarian work. One of the IFRC's biggest tasks is to take disaster law to the same scale and effectiveness as humanitarian law. The one is over 50 years old, and the other is not much more than 15, and the age difference shows. We have discussed the rules which are binding in international law and the Fourth Geneva Convention when it comes to the delivery of relief in armed conflict. However, there is currently no comprehensive treaty on these issues in non-conflict disasters, where one might think it should be so much easier to find an agreement. The lack of laws and procedures to regulate incoming disaster relief at national and international level has had and continues to have significant effects. We see the problem of overregulation, which leads to unnecessary bureaucratic bottlenecks showing the entry and distribution of relief, and we see the problem of under-regulations, which permits poor quality and lack of coordination. Laws and guidelines are essential to enabling us to undertake our work, providing assistance during this crisis. The UN's International Law Commission has prepared a set of draft articles on the protection of persons in the event of disasters. The draft articles are due to come up for consideration before the UN General Assembly at the end of this year. These articles could form the basis of a new global agreement, an agreement which could spur further interests and commitment among states to put in place domestic laws and procedures to bring about better international assistance after disasters. Before the International Law Commission began its work, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has set out rectifying this serious problem. We spoke to governments, local and international aid providers, and developed the formal guidelines for the domestic facilitation and regulation of international disaster relief and initial recovery assistance. To date, our national societies have worked over 50 countries to review their legal frameworks for disaster management and response. 28 countries have adopted provision based on international disaster reduction law guidelines into their national legislation. A further 17 draft bills or regulations are pending. IFRC has been called on by national societies and government to provide operational advice to help facilitate emergency response operations. And this has been tested in large emergency operations in the Philippines, in Vanuatu, in Fiji, in Nepal during the last earthquake, in Haiti, Ecuador, and Myanmar. Good progress is being made, but the progress is slow. But let me briefly mention one other way in which we are trying to improve the environment in which we work. This is the area of volunteer protection. Again, this is of interest to you because of the increasing death toll among humanitarian workers, either in conflict or in disaster settings. Just a week ago, on the 19th of August, you may have seen that the world marked the International Humanitarian Day with a hashtag and the slogan that volunteers and civilians are not a target. It was a grim anniversary for us. Every violent death of a health or aid volunteer sent a shudder through the humanitarian world. This happened again 2 weeks ago in Central African Republic, where we are working closely with our member national society to strengthen the health system that has been totally destroyed during these years of war. It happened when 6 of our volunteers in the very health center, that they tried to rehabilitate, to serve people, they were found and killed, 6 of them. So far in 2017, this year, 24 volunteers and staff have lost their lives to violence. The year is not over. Already 24, including in Syria, in Mexico, in Nigeria, in Mali, and in Central African Republic. This year is therefore on track to becoming the deadliest year since 2011. Our 17 million Red Cross and Red Crescent volunteers are our greatest treasure. Much of our moral authority and unique presence derives from them, and their simple desire to do good and offer time to help their fellow human beings. They speak local languages, they understand local cultures, they're courageous and committed, but as I said, we cannot continue to measure the courage through the number we lose on the line of duty. We must protect them to continue to do their vital work, and we must do more to ensure their safety. The obligation to protect aid workers and civilians lies with parties to the conflict. International humanitarian law makes this very clear. You too have a role in mentoring the development of national law and institutional measures to handle war crime and crimes against humanity, and to ensure that they are not ignoring attacks against local humanitarians. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm coming now to a close, and I hope that we've tried to link your worlds of international criminal and humanitarian law with ours. One of those links, of course, is the IHL younger sibling, which is the International Disaster Reduction Law. But I think the greatest of the links is the humanity we share, the fundamental principle of humanitarianism, which is uniting us all. Our world is hurting, as I said, it is suffering many times. For all advances of the 20th century, never has the world looked more powerless and more threatened than in these first 2 decades of the 21st century. None of us can stand for this. All of us have a role to play as stewards of our inheritance in preserving our planet and civilization for our children, our children's children, and the next generation to come. What has gone before is not good enough. I think it is fitting that Clara Barton herself should have the last word. And she wrote, "I have an almost complete disregard of precedent and a faith in the possibility of something better. It irritates me to be told how things have always been done. I defy the tyranny of precedent. I go for anything new, but only anything new that might improve the past." So together, maybe we should engage in improving the past. Thank you very much.